your oh, it is now recording. I apologize. So let me once again reintroduce myself and just share that my name is Chris Finn, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's session titled Bias and What We Can Do About It. Welcome, everyone, and let us formally begin. Some of the learning points for today. We're going to discuss many things, we're going to share some things, but these are the actual points that we can learn from today. And we're going to unpack some of these throughout the session and have an opportunity to share. So, some of the learning points here. The first of which is we're going to explore the human evolutionary psychology and why we have bias hardwired into us. You know, in many of my sessions, I have come across many participants who are very apprehensive to agree or to admit that they have biases. And I want to say in the onset that all of us have biases. It is not an immediately negative thing. It is something, as it mentions here, that is often hardwired into us. And oftentimes our biases are created by things out of our control. Where we were born, where we grew up, the culture we were born into, the household we were born into. All of those things impact our own personal biases. And many of those biases live beneath the surface that we're not immediately aware of, which is why we sometimes call them implicit or unconscious biases. We also want to learn what we can do about our own behavior to make the workplace fairer and more inclusive. This is a time when we want to work to make everyone in our workplace feel welcomed. We want to welcome a diverse group of people of different ages and cultures and backgrounds and religions and skin colors and genders. We want to be open to those things so as to have a more inclusive environment in our workplace. So we're going to learn about some things we can do with our own behavior to help address that. We also want to establish how we can stand alongside others who are not like us, but deserve to be treated right or deserve to be treated with respect. So it's not just about being a thoughtful person yourself and taking care of yourself and your family. It's also about being an ally or a support to others in the workplace, particularly. Today's agenda. We're going to talk about your experience of bias or your experience with bias. We're also going to discuss why we even care about biases. We're going to share some examples of inclusion by unlocking some knowledge for the group that's here. We're going to also unpack what you can do to reduce your own bias and then what you can do to reduce bias for others. Not immediately an easy thing to do, trying to help open up other people's minds, other people's thinking. Not always easy to do, but something we can help do to reduce bias in others. And then today I'm going to make it a point to stop a little early in order to open it up for any questions that you might have, and I'll do my best to address those questions. Now, here you see a group of diverse people. These are various people with various cultures, and I would imagine they come from all walks of life. You see, the picture is black and white, which is great because it doesn't speak to skin tone or culture. You can imagine or try to, perceive by looking at a person's hair texture or, what they have on. I also like that it includes two people who are in a wheelchair. Oftentimes we refer to them as handicapped, but I've heard people say handy capable. I've also heard people say that they are, just challenged, by not being able to walk or not being able to walk as smoothly as others. But they are great additions to this photo as well as great additions to society and everything that we bring to the table. More and more often, our places of worship, our workplaces, our professional environments, the places where we shop and travel and visit, often mirror this picture, right? That people are of all ages and all backgrounds in all walks of life. And these are the kind of pictures that we see more and more often that align itself with the world we live in today. And we want to be prepared for that world as well as open to the way others think and open to what others bring to the table. Now, I want you to think for a minute and I want you to describe yourself. If we were in a classroom right now, this is the time where I would ask you to take out a piece of paper and I would ask you to describe yourself. But right now, we're going to do it in our minds. What are the characteristics that make you who you are? Right? Think about all of the different characteristics that make up the person that you are today. These are, like the longest list of labels that you could think of to describe yourself. And when you think about this, think about your physical characteristics, your personality, your relationships, your education, where you were born, where you live, hobbies, the things that you love. And it goes so deep, these things. So let me just model it for you all. So again, my name is Chris Finn. I am an African American man. I am a father of two daughters. I am a husband of my wife for 22 years. I am 6'3" and I weigh about 270 pounds. I'm a big guy. I also feel like I have an open, thoughtful, kind of respectful personality. As far as relationships, as I mentioned, I have a wife and daughters. I have three sisters, a brother. So I'm also a brother. I'm also a son. As far as education, I mean, I have a bachelor's degree. I have two master's degrees. I was born in New Jersey. I currently live in New Jersey. One of my hobbies is riding my bike. I love listening to music, listening to podcasts, reading books. I love historical fiction, science fiction. I love movies. I'm a dog lover. We have a dog. I mean, this list can continue on and on and on and on. And really, it's an opportunity for you to unpack who you are as a person and really describe yourself. And when you start making that list, as I just did, you recognize that that list, you can probably fill up 20 pages with that list, right? I'm a seafood lover. I love to barbecue. I'm this, I'm that, and when you think about the other people that you come into contact with in your life, in your personal relationships or in your professional relationships, think about them as having a similar list, right? We're all not just one thing. We're a multitude of things. And it's important that we keep our minds open to that as we engage with other people. So when you're describing yourself, think about this and also think about how other people have similar lists that really unpack who they are as individuals. Then we're going to define bias. So let me share with you quickly. Bias is an inclination or prejudice for or against a person or group, especially in a way considered to be unfair. So oftentimes here, they're labeling it as something against a person or a group, but I'm going to share with you that it goes even deeper than that, and a bias does not immediately have to be negative. If you want to test yourself, you can go to a site that's called Project Implicit. And implicit is spelled Implicit. It's a Harvard study and it's a nonprofit organization that does international collaborative work about researching. And what you can do is go online to that Harvard Institute and you can take what they call the implicit bias test. It's really powerful. I've done it twice in my career so far. I did it once when I was serving as a school principal, and I did it again about 4 years ago. And it's interesting because it's a series of questions and it requires you to make choices about specific questions. And after you finish this, if you're really honest, it will help point out some of the biases that you may have. Now, what's interesting is the definition provided today immediately talks about bias being against another person or against another culture. I will put that in the chat as soon as I have an opportunity, or I will just share that if you search Harvard University and it is called Project Implicit, you will be able to find that test and take it. And let me share a little bit more though about bias. So let me just give you a personal story, okay? So my daughters, both my daughters, one who's now in college, one who's in high school, their names are Maya and Simone. When they were young, my wife and I were teaching in the Bronx at the time, and as a result, we had a woman in the town next to us take care of our daughters during the day. Her name was Hasina. Hasina was a woman from Trinidad who was famous for making this Caribbean cooking, right? So when she was young, when my daughters were young, Hasina's specialty, one of her specialties, was making these things called codfish fritters. And they're like fried little pieces of dough with some codfish in them. They were incredibly tasty, incredibly wonderful. And as a result, my daughters spent a great deal of their time eating codfish fritters when they were just toddlers. As they grew up, they are biased towards codfish fritters. Like if you would go to a table and they have 17 things to choose from, and one of the things that they have to choose from to eat is codfish fritters, trust that my daughters will make a beeline for the codfish fritters. They love it. It was born into them. It was something that they were eating once they were like 2 or 3 years old. And as a result, you could say they have a bias towards codfish fritters. Now, it doesn't mean they hate every other food, but based on some of their circumstances when they were raised, when they were growing up, it lent itself to them really having this bias towards codfish fritters. So I share that because I want to unpack any people's negative feeling about having a bias, because it's not immediately a horrific thing. It is oftentimes something that you prefer based on some things that were out of your control. So I wanted to unpack that first. Secondly, I want us to look at the screen that is present right now. And when you look at this screen, I want you to think about it in a really interesting way. When you were unpacking yourself and thinking about yourself, there were some of these items on your list. And if we start at the top, there are some characteristics that are innate to you. We cannot change them. Some of these innate characteristics are like your skin color, your DNA traits, your height, maybe the things like you're allergic to. These are things that you were born with. Shout out to my friend who's looking for the codfish fritter recipe. I appreciate that. But think about these things that are innate. These are some characteristics that you have no control over. You are just born into it. It's part of your DNA code. You are connected to them. You can't change them. Then go to the bottom of the screen, and then there are some characteristics that are learned, developed, or chosen, like the love for codfish fritters, right? Or the your taste in clothing or your style or the type of food that you like. Like we love Caribbean food, I love Italian food, I love Asian food. And what's interesting is sometimes there are characteristics that are learned. My father, who grew up in the deep south, his family ate a food called chitlings, right? They actually were called chitterlings. Many of you out there might know what chitlins are. But in essence, they are actually pig intestines. And when we grew up, in New Jersey, I despised them. They make the house really smell. You have to clean them a great deal. They're not very healthy. But what's so interesting is it was something that was learned by my father. It was like ingrained in his DNA. And every New Year's Day, he would make chitlins. And, after a while, we asked him to stop eating them because his cholesterol was high and this, that, and the other. But it made him sad because, frankly, his DNA, or maybe not DNA, it was a learned behavior. This chitlins to him meant a new year. It meant family time. It meant togetherness. It meant this family meal. So he had a bias towards chitlins because that's how he was raised. So think about that. Some of the characteristics you exhibit are innate to you in that you could not change them, and then some of the characteristics are learned or you've chosen those. Then let's look at the other bar. All the way to the right, some of our characteristics are visible, like eye color or hair texture or the way someone's body language is, or again, like how tall you are. Those are things that we could look at someone and see. But if you look to the left side of the screen, some of our characteristics, most of them, if you will, are invisible, like your emotions or your culture or your religion, right? Or your age. You know, a lot of times people cannot look at someone and see their age. They cannot look at someone and see their religion. I mean, if it's a Jewish person, maybe with a yarmulke on, you can assume, but we won't know for sure until we get to know that person. A great activity I often do when I'm in public doing these sessions is an activity called the cultural iceberg. And what's interesting about that is I want you to just for a moment envision an iceberg, right? We've all seen Titanic. We know an iceberg is a very large piece of ice that is traditionally floating on the water in an Arctic region. And above the water, we see a huge chunk of this iceberg. You know, icebergs sometimes are as big as a city, big as your town. These are huge pieces of ice that are floating in the Arctic. And we see the iceberg above the water. But what's interesting is there is so much of that iceberg that we cannot see. It is beneath the water. And sometimes the pieces under the water are twice the size of the piece that we see above the water. So I want you to think about that as it pertains to diversity. And when you meet people and when you greet people, what you see of that person is very little compared to who that person really is. And when you think about yourself, it's the same way. What people see in the workplace is not a lot as compared to what's beneath the water, what's beneath the surface and beneath what we can see with the naked eye. So be mindful as you think about your own personal biases that you're not making judgments based on just what you can see above the water. Okay? Now, why do we even care about bias? You know, when I work with schools and organizations, I have been asked this question. I've had teachers, educators ask me, like, why are we even studying this? Why are we even engaged in this? It can be sometimes difficult for people to talk about these things and uncomfortable, but frankly, we want to be informed, educated, and exposed to different people, to different cultures, to different backgrounds because we want to have empathy for someone outside of ourselves. You know, we want to make stronger connections and build relationships. So it's important that we recognize the differences that we share, the differences that we have, as well as the things that we have in common. And it helps us care for other people in society. It helps us build better relationships with colleagues and our personal and professional lives. So that's why we engage in this bias work. That's why we care. You know, even as it pertains to finances, you know, I'm blessed that my daughters have lived a really great life, right? They haven't had to want for much of anything. But I feel it's important sometimes to expose them to people who have less than we have, right? Part of it is because I want them to be empathetic. I want them to recognize that not everyone's going to have their own bedroom with a TV, with Netflix, and have, you know, codfish fritters at the function. Some people are struggling to live check to check. They don't have a home. They don't have a house. They don't have an apartment like you do. And I want my daughters to be respectful of that. So we find ways to have them volunteer in the community, work with those less fortunate than us, because we want to build that empathy in our children. And frankly, as adults, we want to continue to exhibit that type of empathy when we're living in this very diverse world. Now, when you unpacked for yourself, it's important to think what was it like. And when you think about how people view you, you want to think about that and be mindful of how people view others. So think about that there are lenses that we have that are looking out at the world, but at the same time, there are ways that people are looking in at us as well. Now we want to unpack just a little bit about why inclusion really matters. Oftentimes in society, when we're studying history, I used to be a history teacher, you would think that everything in society was developed by, you know, white men, frankly. A lot of the history books show the George Washington, the Abraham Lincoln, the Thomas Jefferson, and frankly, it doesn't include a great deal of accomplishments of women or a great deal of accomplishments for people of color. And it also makes you believe that only older people really help impact society. But let's unpack a couple of these things. First of all, women, mothers to be exact, are part of the reason that we have safer cars today. You know that there was an organization developed called MADD, called MAD, and it was Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And as a result, they banded together across the country, a really powerful organization that helped car companies really develop safer ways to keep people safe with the seat belts. It also led to this seatbelt legislation that made it a law for everyone to wear their seatbelts across the country. And that was developed by women, right? And we don't often hear that. We want to be inclusive of the voices of women because they're making great change in society. Let's talk about climate change, for example. A few years ago, there was a young girl, her name was Greta Thunberg, and she made this really impassioned plea to this World Health Organization about climate change. And you know, if you Google her, you'll hear her speech. She is a dynamic speaker. She's so energetic, and basically, she was telling these leaders of the world, like, you need to be embarrassed by the way you're treating climate change. You're going to leave the world a horrible place for the rest of us. And as a result, this young girl helped impact climate change, right? She really helped change a lot of people's ideas. This wasn't a 60-year-old man. This wasn't a 50-year-old scientist. This was a young girl whose ideas helped push the country and the world, really. A lot of inventions, a lot of educational devices are developed by people of color, by women, by people from other countries. Most of the inventions, the phones you use, the computers that you're probably on right now, were not created in America. Many times they're created in Asia, in China, and Japan. So on one hand, you might say to yourself, a biased person who does not like Asian people might make all these kind of comments about Asian people negative, but then they're holding a phone that was made in Asia. They're getting into a car that was made in Japan. They're using a internet system that was developed in Taiwan. It's like all of these things impact society. A friend here just shared an African American contribution. Charles Richard Drew developed the blood storage system for the Red Cross. That is a fact. This is an African American man who was disenfranchised, marginalized in this country, but developed something that has saved lives throughout history. And I bet, if I asked people from their own culture to throw in the chat a famous person who helped move society, this chat would fill up with, 346 responses of people who have impacted society. So part of this slide is designed to show all of us we can't just live in our bubbles and be in and have these blind spots. We have to be thoughtful and mindful of what other people bring to the table and why inclusion really matters. I'll also share, for those of you who work in an organization that's really diverse, bringing in different voices and cultures and ages and backgrounds and religions, it helps make you a more innovative and progressive organization. Over the past 10, 15 years, whenever I see a commercial, let's say some company puts out a commercial and it offends black women, this commercial, it makes me think, you know what? They probably did not have a black woman at the table when they were developing this, right? When a clothing company puts out a product, and let's say it offends Jewish women, it'll make me think all the time, you know what? They probably did not have a Jewish woman at the table when they were developing this so as to vet it properly. Now the company has put out this product. There are people boycotting, they're offended, they're losing their reputation because they weren't a diverse group of people putting these things together. If we have an organization where everyone looks the same, they're from the same place, the same religion, the same culture, the same background, we will not be innovative, we will not be progressive, and frankly, we will probably not survive as an organization if we don't look to be more progressive and innovative, and we get to that point by being more diverse. Now, let's move ahead. Here's some summary of some things that happened so far. So, we're solving the most difficult, pressing, and complex problems that humans face. That's a really tough thing to do. The next thing is the best ideas from the most diverse sources become new perspectives are critical because new perspectives. This is what I was just talking about. When you have more diverse voices, you get new perspectives and that helps you grow. Next one here. Everyone having a voice because they feel that they belong and are welcome. That's one of the things that's so powerful when I do work around diversity and inclusion. And oftentimes people use those two terms interchangeably, but they are very different. Diversity is the idea that there are many diverse people in a specific space. But inclusion means that everyone in the space has a voice that they can share and bring to the table. So often I have been to organizations that are maybe inclusive and everybody has a voice, but it is not diverse at all. And then I've been in many organizations where they are very diverse, but they're not inclusive in that people don't really get to share their voice or contribute to the greater good. So think about that as well. When you reflect about bias, think about your company and does it have diversity and inclusion? Next one down, including people who are not like us for the very reason that they are not like us. This is dynamic and it's an important factor. As an African American man who was a principal of a school in New Jersey, it was really powerful for me that my director of curriculum and instruction, my partner, was a white woman. Right. And as a result, we kind of represented these different sides of the coin. And we really came up with some thoughtful ways to use our information in a powerful way. And we contributed to each other's thinking because we were coming from very different backgrounds. And interestingly enough, I was coming as the African American man from a more suburban kind of middle class uh, background. And my partner, Miss Ford, was coming from, her family was in poverty. She was an immigrant. She lived in a really tough place. So people would look at us and often, your bias oftentimes makes you think the black guy is from the hood and the white woman is from the suburbs. But in our situation, it was the polar opposite, right? My family was really, arguably rich compared to her family. And she really had a lot of struggles coming up, and I did not. So we would push each other's thinking as it pertained to how to support our students and support our community. And we were better for being different and being able to bring our different ideas to the table. Then it's important that we're recognizing we all share a common humanity, irrespective of the different labels. That one is really powerful as well. I do another activity sometimes that where I say, what is your primary identity? When you walk out of your front door in the morning, how do you present to the world? And I share that I present as an African American man, right? Someone else said they present as Jewish, like their religion was their primary identity. Another woman was joking. She was recently married. She said, I present as a married woman, right? Like that's how she presents in the world. But someone stood up in the session and said, you know what? I present as human. I am a human being who just wants the respects of a human being. And I really honor that because we are all sharing a common humanity. We all need food and water and oxygen to survive. And although we have different backgrounds, different labels, ages, colors, cultures, we are all in this human family, and we need to remember that as well. And then lastly, we need to have a commitment to human dignity and diversity. I really believe this when we see people who are less fortunate than us, it is not our duty to step over them or frown at them or roll our eyes at them. It's our duty to recognize them as humans and continue to treat them with dignity and respect. So if you allow yourself to be governed by those tenets, you are already ready to engage with other communities, other cultures, and it will decrease your personal bias. Now, we're going to talk for a minute about your commitment to dignity and diversity. What actions can you take personally to maybe decrease your bias and support others around you? And what actions will you take in order to get to that place? So this is an activity that's called the Johari window. And really, frankly, this is one that's best done when we're in public so I can use visuals and what have you. But I just want to walk you through it quietly and quickly. If you look at the diagram, you will see at the top, these are things that are known to yourself. If you look at the bottom, these are things that are unknown to yourself. If you look to the right, these are things that are known to others. And you look to the left, these are things that are not known to others. And in between the first section, as we're starting, if we're moving clockwise, we're going to start by the hidden self. And these are biases known to yourself, but not known to others. So these might be things that you have that you're aware of in your mind, but other people are not immediately aware of this. And then you look to your right, it's open self, which are biases known to self and to others. So these are things you may have shared with people, shared with your family, shared with your colleagues, and now they're aware of those things. Then there's the blind self, which is your blind spot. And these are biases unknown to yourself, but not known to others. And these are tough. These are some of the things that you might have been told as a child. These are some of the things that you might have watched on TV or developed watching throughout life that you don't even know you have. Like my wife and I used to joke, forgive me about this one, but my wife and I used to joke in the 90s, we're both African American individuals, but we used to joke in the 1990s that if you were an alien that came from outer space and you started to look at TV or commercials or the news or even movies, that you would think black men had to fit in three categories. Either you were a super athlete, you were a super musician or artist, or you were a criminal. It was just like those were the three images we saw the most on TV, in the movies and commercials, in the news, in the newspaper. These were the three main images we saw for black men. We saw super athletes, we saw super entertainers, and then we saw criminals. We didn't see many black engineers, black nurses, black architects, black dentists, black, bus drivers. We just saw those three areas really highlighted. And whether or not you are aware of it, some of that subtle imagery may have stuck into your brain, and that creates some of these biases, right? So think about that blind self. And then there's unknown self, which is biases unknown to self and others. These are more like the ones I just described that we're not even aware of at all. So the Johari window, and the term window is used to just think about how we view outside of the world and how others might view us and look inside to our lives. A window works, two ways. You can look out and other people can look in. So think about this as you unpack your thinking around any potential biases. Now, it's important to become aware. The first and most basic action you can take. This is interesting because another thing happens when I lead sessions around implicit bias or unconscious bias. One of the biggest responses I get are, Chris, how can I be aware if it's unconscious, right? Like when you're sleeping, you're not immediately aware of what your body's doing. Similarly, when some of this thinking is unconscious, you can become unaware of what's going on. Where did this come from? I often use a New York Times video when I start to unpack unconscious bias with schools and organizations. And what's interesting is the woman in the video, I often use it because she says, imagine unconscious bias is sort of like a smog or a mist that we were breathing in our entire lives and we were unaware of it, right? If you're breathing in this mist, you might not even believe or recognize that you're being taught something. It's just happening to you. So I do another activity with a group of people where I say a statement and you say what fits that statement, right? So let's practice it here virtually just for a moment. I say peanut butter, you say, right? Most people out there just now, whether you said it out loud or whether you thought it, you said jelly, right? Now, mind you, someone put banana. Someone put banana in the chat. I love that. Many people have put different things. But my point is, you didn't go get a master's degree to learn that peanut butter goes with jelly. Right? It's just think about every commercial you saw, every movie you saw, every TV show you saw, every after school special you saw, every lunch that you got as you grew up in school. Like we learn that peanut butter goes with jelly. That is something that's been ingrained in our psyche, right, since the beginning of time. And as a result, we start making those connections in our lives without even being aware of it. And there are many things like that. I have a whole activity where I do that. I say macaroni and what's interesting is many people put cheese, right? Macaroni and cheese. But I did I worked with a group in Staten Island, New York. Staten Island is a very heavy Italian community. And I said macaroni and they said sauce, right? Many people said gravy. And what's interesting is in the Italian community, that marinara sauce, that red sauce that we often call sauce, the real hardcore Italians from the motherland, they often call it gravy. But what's so interesting is that fit their culture, right? In an African American household, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, and I don't know if anyone here is African American on the line, but macaroni and cheese is serious. We go so serious with our macaroni and cheese when it comes for Thanksgiving, when it comes to Christmas. We might even go so far as to ask, who made the mac and cheese, right? Because if it's Aunt Sheila, we know that Aunt Sheila really makes the three different kind of cheeses and she bakes it appropriately. But we know that Aunt Loretta, she makes hers with some other kind of spinach mix or something. We don't like hers. Like, someone just put facts in the chat, because that's how real we are with our macaroni and cheese. It's a cultural thing. Now, we're not the only culture, of course, that eats macaroni and cheese, but we might have like a doctorate in macaroni and cheese, right? And someone else said, don't let it be your first time. That is a fact. Don't let it be your first time making mac and cheese for a family. You better have mastered that mac and cheese. You need like a ninth degree black belt in it. And someone else said yams, or someone else said ill with sugar in it. I'm with you, my friend. No sugar in my mac and cheese. But what's so interesting is when I did that same activity amongst a group of Italian Americans, they were more connected to having their macaroni with sauce, right? Or one gentleman, even on his paper, he literally wrote Nana's sauce, like macaroni and Nana's sauce. That's how much of a visceral reaction he made towards it. And it just spoke to their bias. It's not an immediate horrible thing. It just speaks to our own bias, some of the things we're not aware of. So be mindful first about your own biases. That's one of the things that we really need to work on. And let's discuss a couple of others. Thank you for that, my friend. One thing is to offer to mentor someone. A great way to break yourself out of a bias is to become a mentor. And frankly, mentoring isn't solving a problem for another person. It is listening with the attention to learn from their experience, not invalidating their point of view. Asking and being interested in the barriers to inclusion that they see. And this is really, first of all, I want to share mentoring is not for the light of heart, right? Mentoring is not for someone who wants to kind of stick their toe in and take their toe out. Mentoring is a really important thing. And I too have mentored school principals and school leaders and district leaders over the years. And as a young man, when I was first teaching in the Bronx, I started to mentor a young African American kid from the Bronx. And this, I'm telling you this story because it was actually a time when I went wrong, right? I grew up in New Jersey, in a suburban town in New Jersey. And as a result, when I went to go teach in the Bronx, the students that I was teaching were really less fortunate than I was growing up. Many of them, right? They were struggling to make ends meet. Many of them, coming from impoverished households. And I became a mentor. And in retrospect, I remember I was thinking to myself, like, I'm going to fix this kid. Like, I'm going to help this kid. I'm going to solve this kid's problems. And that's not the way we should enter mentoring. As I mentioned before, mentoring isn't solving a problem for another person or like curing a person. It's listening to them with the intention of learning from their experience and not invalidating their point of view. As much as I thought that I was helping him, I realized later that I was really kind of being condescending, like, don't you have books and why don't you study and do all of these things? And I was kind of coming from a very closed minded limited lens. So I'm sharing with you all out there, mentoring is positive, it's powerful, but make sure that you are listening more than you're speaking, right? Make sure that you're open to who this person already is before you got there, and you want to help guide them. And if they reach out to you specifically for advice, then you can give it. But don't walk into the session like, here's what I'm going to tell you how to live your life, change everything you're doing, throw that out, start over, do what I do because I'm correct. That's not the way to mentor. And if you can find yourself mentoring a younger person, maybe even from a different nationality or cultural background, it can really make a positive and powerful connection. So, mentoring is a great way to help us address some of our biases. Then you want to get involved because mentoring means you are getting close up to what you might not otherwise see. You know, you're seeing a different area, a different culture, a different group of people, and you want to be thoughtful about that when you get involved in mentoring. And then, of course, you want to become an ally. An ally, the term I've seen thrown around over the past few years and maybe used a little incorrectly, and I've even seen some people step up and claim like I'm an ally, I'm being an ally. I don't think it's something that you want to wear like a big S on your chest like you're Superwoman or Superman, but it is something that you can help do in your life. And an ally is any person that actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people. What gets in the way of you being an ally is when you start to have that holier than thou mentality, right? Like I just described, I was guilty of when I was trying to serve as a mentor. Like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to save this room for all the women, or I'm going to make sure that all the black people feel comfortable. It's like, that's not allyship. Allyship is also about being open, being a listener, and helping to support the growth and development of people who are different than you. So being an ally is something really powerful, and it's something that we should all work to support. You also want to make sure that you raise others up. Everyone deserves the support and not sympathy. That's powerful. I often have a session I break down empathy versus sympathy. Sympathy is kind of like that, oh, poor you, like you broken vessel, you're such a destitute, hurt, destroyed person, like poor you. Empathy is different. Empathy is like, you know what? I feel where you're coming from. I recognize why you're upset, but you can still be successful. You can still make it. You can still grow. You can still develop. I know you're down now and I'm feeling for you, but I believe you have the ability to grow and raise up, right? Sympathy is kind of like that, oh, woe is you. But empathy is more like, yes, I recognize, but I feel for you, but you can move on and you can still be successful. So be thoughtful about that, particularly when you're trying to engage as an ally. And salute to my friends who are sharing some affirmations in the chat. I appreciate it. Now, I'm going to show you just quickly how to create a inclusive environment. These are not the only ways to create an inclusive environment, but I'm going to share a few and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So anyone with a question, get ready because you're going to be able to share in the chat in a minute. Number one, get involved with people's extracurricular activities. Powerful thing to do. If your colleague plays the violin and an orchestra, go see them outside of work. If your friend plays an indoor soccer league, go watch a game, right? It builds a greater connection. Be friendly and remember how important manners can be. Wow. That simple good morning, that simple good afternoon, that please and thank you, they go a long way. You want to include others in the conversation. Nothing is more awkward than when you hear people talking and then you walk in the room and they're like, whoop, and get quiet, right? You immediately think they're talking about you or being rude. You want to include others in a conversation when it's appropriate, right? You don't want to be at a table with 6 people and only 2 people are sharing their ideas. Consider others' viewpoints. It is one of the things that has moved my career, helped shape who I am. I didn't get here by just living in a silo, having blinders on. I listened to those around me, mentors, parents, my wife, different teachers, and it helps you grow. Choose topics, venues, and events where everyone will feel included. If you have, three members of your team that are in a wheelchair, you don't want to go to a gymnasium to like a bouncy house for a school event, right? I once upon a time, this is a simple version, but I once upon a time had a school secretary when I was principal who was like deathly allergic to shellfish. Even if she just smelled like shrimp in the air, she would start having an allergic reaction. So guess what? When we went out as a staff, we did not go to a seafood restaurant. It wasn't inclusive of her, right? Then sign up and lead an event in the office. Many times I share things and people say, well, they don't have that at my job. You can lead something, you can start something. A colleague in my office in Massachusetts, she started this thing where people get up and just take a walk around the building, right? It started as like a little cute, fun thing, and now everyone is doing it. It didn't exist before, and now the conversations that are had during that walk are dynamic. Be conscious of others, be mindful, be empathetic. Listen to what others have to say before expressing your viewpoint. That's important. I often say, listen to hear and not respond. Then never speak over someone, interrupt them, or cut another person off. That's powerful. Then you want to educate someone if you know something that they don't know, but you never want to put them down. You also want to smile. A smile goes a long way. It's a perfect universal body language for being friendly. And as simple saying good morning to your workers can go a long way. That's how we started with the be friendly and remember manners. So a good morning can go a long way. I also have a friend in the chat who said that they are saving the screen so they can see it later. That's perfect. You can also take out your phone and take a picture of it. But let me also share this question, and I'm going to open it up now for questions. Someone shared, what is the best response to someone who says that DEI efforts are reverse racism? Hmm. That is interesting, and it often happens. Oftentimes I'll see people who say, as I mentioned before, why are we studying diversity? Why do we want more equity? Why are we talking about culture? And the goal is that we want people to all feel connected in the workplace. I joke with my friends who teach history. Sometimes you start teaching history in fourth grade, and this is for my people of color out there. You open up that history book and it has the kings and queens of France. Then it has, who look like white heroes. Then you look at the pilgrims who look like white heroes. Then you look at George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison, Abraham Lincoln, all white heroes. And then you see come to a page where they talk about the slave trade and you see bodies of color coming off of a boat in chains, right? That's the first place that many people of color see themselves in history. So, how does that shape their psyche? In a similar way, make sure that in your office, everyone's feeling connected and that you're not dealing in reverse racism. You're just being empathetic for all of the people who work there. Another person put, every spoke in the wheel contributes. That is a dynamic statement that I am going to actually copy down. And to my friend, I won't say your name out loud, but I'm going to give you credit for that statement the first like 4 or 5 times I say it. And then I'm going to act like, hey, I have this great statement. Every spoke in the wheel contributes. That's a great one. That's a great way to think about our workplace as well. Another friend shared, I've recently become a widow. I'm experiencing things as never before. There's a lot of sympathy, but very few mentors. God bless you for sharing and being vulnerable. That is a tough position to be in. And as I would imagine, people around you probably are thinking like, oh, poor you, so destitute now. Your spouse has passed and now you're in this lonely place. And where some of that may be true, you need to reach out to people who have been through this before. Go online, look for even podcasts or different speakers who have spoken about life after becoming a widow, and find new ways where you can build yourself up, get out into the world, live a happy and blessed life without people continuously giving you the poor you thing. It's not the same, but when my father passed, I remember, my father was ill for a long time, and my brothers and sisters, we all got together. And in a weird way, they say you can never get ready for your parent passing. But in a weird way, we really were like ready. We prepared ourselves. We prepared everything. And even after he passed, people would call me and they're like, how you doing, Chris? And I'm saying, I'm doing okay. And they'd be like, Noel, I know you're so you're so sad and everything's horrible. And I'm like, no, but I'm okay. And they say, yeah, and I know everything's dark right now and it's horrible. It's like, okay, I needed more mentors at that time too. So salute to you. Um, Whew, another friend put a bar in here. Black history does not start with slavery. That is the truth. That is also the truth. And I would also like to add that is the truth. So, everyone out here who believes that people of color or Africans just started when they were brought to this country in chains, that is not the case. Do your Googles, as some people might say. Another friend with the spokes said, therefore, every contribution should be valued. Another one just threw in the chat, George Washington Carver. That both connects to the contributions of African American scientists as well as my peanut butter comment. If you know about George Washington Carver, then you know where I'm coming from. Another friend shared, is bias something that can be overcome or just understood? Great question. Very much like a session I did recently with stress. The session was not about how to get rid of stress in your life because I don't believe that's possible to live just a completely stress free life. You're going to be in traffic, you're going to be online at the grocery store. Some things are going to stress you. But the session was about how to manage stress because you can't eliminate it. And in the same way, I'd say it connects to bias. I don't know that I can say bias can be overcome or like eliminated, but it can be understood and it can be unpacked and better managed when we have a more thoughtful understanding of our own biases. Great question. Another person said bias and racism are not the same. Racism is a social construct. Caucasians are not systematically being excluded. Having biases against Caucasians is what people really mean by reverse racism. And as you mentioned, we are all biased in our own ways. Wow, great comment. Another person said, couldn't racism run both ways? So wouldn't reverse racism be a good thing? I would say no, it wouldn't be a good thing. I think racism in any form is a negative thing. And I would say that we need to be more mindful about our biases and our own prejudices, right? Like prejudice means prejudging something. So oftentimes we might prejudge, like my sister-in-law, she is just against sushi. I don't like sushi. I hate sushi. Then I ask you, have you ever tasted sushi? And she says no. So she's prejudging this food. It's a simple explanation, but it's how we should treat other humans. And I would say racism in any form is probably not a good thing. Another friend said, oh, this is my friend who's a widow. They have a journal. They've written a widow with prompts to answer. They attended a support group and she's finding her own way. Oh, sorry. She actually said no need to share. And I apologize for sharing because I didn't read ahead. But I'm glad I did because you're actually giving us more hope out here that you're not just kind of wallowing in your sadness or in that experience. You're definitely finding ways to grow and develop, and bless you. And thank you for contributing that. Another person said you manage your reaction to stress, be responsive, not reactive. Excellent. Another person said, my preacher always said his story is not always, or history is always his story, if that's what we all we ever learn. Another great comment. Another friend shared, reframe your bias by choosing photos and research that help you recognize your misguided thought process. That's a great one. And how about just getting to know people who are unlike you? You know, I'm aging myself now, but if people were aware of a clothing company years ago called Benetton, they were famous for having so many different multicultures in their ad campaigns. And when my wife and I, would drive our daughters around when they were younger, going to different events, I used to joke that the back of my car looks like a Benetton ad, right? My daughters have friends of every culture, religion, race, background, and I'm blessed that they have a very kind of unbiased mindset as it pertains to making friends. Another friend said, now that I'm 64, I'm recognizing some senior biases and learning how to look past it and continue to be myself. A person who doesn't consider herself a senior, and it's hard. Salute to you, my friend. And thank you for being mindful of your biases and working to address them. Let me share that after today, I would love for everyone to think about one thing they want to stop doing, one thing they want to start doing, and one thing that they're going to continue doing. Like to my friend who's going to the support group or looking out for mentors, that's something that she can continue to do. And salute to all of my friends who responded in the chat. Let me share that your EAP program provides free counseling and support for employees. It's easily accessible, voluntary, and confidential. It's a service that can provide a great deal of support. I've been blown away when I find out everything that EAP can support, and it is staffed by experienced professionals. Some of the things you may experience where you feel you may need to reach out to your EAP program: sleep problems, relationship difficulties, lack of care about your work, feeling overwhelmed, feeling the excessive anxiety. And if you start to have some feelings about, coping methods, or excuse me, if you start to have feelings about thoughts of harm to yourself or to others, you want to keep in mind that you may want to go seek some more urgent professional care as a result of having these feelings, so that we don't want you to hurt yourself or hurt others. And I want to share this last comment from a friend in the chat who said, I love hearing people's perspectives. Everyone's journey is different, and there is always knowledge to gain. To my friend there, you might have just ended this in the most beautiful fashion with that quote. And to that end, I want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. If you want to learn how to decrease your bias, you could go right to that chat and read my friend's quote again as a way to decrease your bias, be more open, welcome, and empathetic to others as we continue to progress in this innovative and diverse world. Thank you all so much. We covered so much in that hour's time, and I'm greatly thankful for everyone who commented in the chat and asked questions and engaged. You made this session even better. Again, my name is Chris Finn, and I bid you adieu. Have a fantastic day. Ooh, and I'm loving the plaudits coming through in the chat. Thank you all. You're making my afternoon. Bless you all. Have a great day, everyone.